My name is Jane McCurry. I'm the executive director at Clean Fuels Michigan. We are a nonprofit trade association for the alternative fuel and electric vehicle industries with a special focus on Michigan, obviously. Our team is small but mighty and focused on doing what we can to support policy and partnerships that advance these
The
industries.
background on DT Midstream. The term midstream generally means that you're connecting two things, and that's exactly what we do. Our business at the core is to connect natural gas producers with their customers. So we naturally own a significant amount of pipelines, both gathering pipelines, which are the pipelines that you'll find in the production fields in certain producing regions, including shale plays, and then interstate and intrastate pipelines that are generally the larger diameter pipes. That looking at natural gas perhaps more broadly as an industry and trying to understand where are the opportunities to decarbonize industries that rely on natural gas. And by industries, I include power plants and transportation fuel production facilities. It's actually very tough because natural gas does have carbon in it. It's what gives it its heat content and generates energy when it's combusted. We kind of group or think about opportunities in kind of the near term, moderate term, and long term. And in the near term, I think the opportunities that are biggest are, probably focused around efficiency upgrades. So things like cutting gas use or capturing waste heat from combustion. Those are opportunities that certainly make a lot of sense. We also think low carbon methane blending, so finding lower carbon or negative carbon sources of methane and blending them with pipeline quality gas can get you to a lower or net zero type of situation, so that when the carbon's burned, it has less net carbon emissions. I mentioned hydrogen already. We think it's important. We think there's some progress that can be made. Looking, if you want to make an impact now, your choices are somewhat limited, and so I'm going to focus the rest of my presentation on low carbon methane opportunities. And probably the best thing that these fuels have going for them is the fact that they're drop-in fuels by nature. So you can, if you upgrade low carbon methane and meet pipeline standards, you can deliver it, to any pipeline. And the U.S. Has one thing going for it: it has a very robust natural gas pipeline network, making delivery, from a number of sources to consumers is very feasible and possible, and is recognized as one of the leading networks in the world. An important thing about methane is the heat trapping potential of methane when compared to CO2 is significantly higher. So generally a factor in the 25 to 80 times more potent range is applied to get from 1 ton of methane being emitted is like emitting 28 times the same amount of CO2. So it has much higher reflective properties, which make it more harmful. Fugitive methane is also challenging because a lot of times the sources of the emissions are not concentrated. So I think natural gas systems emissions from landfills, manure management facilities, coal mines, those are sometimes geographically spread out, which makes their capture harder to do. The thing that makes methane potentially from sources like this potentially lower negative carbon really gets to how carbon intensity scoring works. And if there is no legal obligation for a party to do anything about the fugitive method, then capturing that gas and converting it into fuels can be viewed as entirely additional. And if you look at my table here, you might say, well, why is landfill carbon intensity 25 to 30, but animal waste is negative 300 to negative 500? How does that make sense when the product we're talking about is chemically identical? It's all CH4 or methane. And the answer is really ties back to this additionality concept that I raised. In the case of a landfill, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, landfills have an operating permit or have an air permit that requires them to implement best available technologies to prevent certain emissions. And so at a minimum, landfills will generally run collection pipes and flare the gas that's generated. So when you do the calculation of carbon intensity, you always start from the business as usual case or the baseline, and then you measure what your project does that further lowers the emissions profile. And so landfill starting from a baseline of flaring and using that gas to instead produce a low carbon fuel and displacing a fossil fuel somewhere has value for sure. But if you compare it to the animal manure scenario where farmers, they may have obligations under certain water quality programs to build and operate manure management facilities, they don't have, or they rarely have an air permit that directs them to capture methane emissions. So for the farmer, for the manure management operator, they're starting from a baseline that's pure venting to the atmosphere. So you can imagine when you start from a baseline that's much lower like that, you are able to get to negative carbon intensity scores. But our project, which is shown here on the screen, is located in the Midwest. It's a project that we bought in 2024 and then greatly expanded. So this picture is actually from around the time we bought it. What we've done is rehabilitated or upgraded some of the processes you see on the screen there, but most importantly, we've run a lot more gas collection pipelines to abandoned coal mines that have never been captured before, and are bringing all that gas to this centralized point. And from the plant on the screen, there's a connection to an interstate pipeline, a 32-inch major interstate pipeline. So that allows us to get the gas out to a number of potential markets. But what really led us to make this investment was a tax credit, a federal tax credit that came out as part of the Inflation Reduction Act under the previous administration, called 45Z. And we have been, relying on that program as a key economic driver to make this rather large investment that we made in pipelines and compression, pencil out. And as luck would have it, with the administration change, there have been changes to 45Z. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act from this past summer did a couple of things, some good and some bad for the tax credit. But one good thing is it extended it to 5 years from 3. But there were also some negatives in that the carbon intensity score, which drives the value of the credit, was effectively capped for some feedstocks and not for others. So, and the fertilizer that was used for the corn is scored. The fertilizer required energy and natural resources to make the ammonia, which gets produced into fertilizer. So that's a positive emission source, or when I say positive, I mean it's emitting carbon dioxide. And then over the growth cycle of the corn, there's a big negative step down, and that represents the CO2 that's removed from the atmosphere by the corn plants. And then you have several steps, up. Changes in land use can lead to increased emissions. The use of fossil fuels at the ethanol plant has emissions. Electricity use has emissions associated with it. And all the way up to the final transportation of the ethanol to the SAF refinery, and then the final step up is the emissions associated with the SAF refinery itself. So if you do all the math on that, and again, this is just a representative example, but in this case, you would say that the sustainable aviation fuel that's produced from this process is 71 grams of CO2 equivalent for every megajoule of aviation fuel produced. So that's kind of a typical scenario. And I've circled one bar in particular that I wanted to focus on this slide, and that's the fossil fuel use emissions. You can see at 21 of 71, that's kind of like 30% of the overall emissions associated with making SAF from corn ethanol. So it's a significant piece. And the exercise I wanted to try to do was, look at that emission and see how it changed if you were to substitute a portion of the natural gas that the plant would otherwise use with low negative carbon methane from, an RNG project or a coal mine project like ours. So I had to make some assumptions here. And the first assumption on, it kind of compares a current case or a base case with what the emissions profile might look just by making that one substitution in fuel. In the current scenario, the ethanol plant makes 100 million gallons per year of ethanol and consumes 3.2 million MMBTUs per year of pipeline natural gas to do it. Pipeline natural gas, it varies throughout the U.S., but an average number or an average like number is about 78 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. Now, if we were to just stop using half that much fossil gas and replace that half with negative CO2 methane, so you're using a blend of negative CO2 methane and pipeline gas or fossil gas, and assuming that the CO2 content or the carbon intensity of the negative methane fuel is negative 400, which is very, very possible, then you would, going back to the first slide, you would reduce this 21 point contribution from fossil natural gas use. You would drop that 64 points. So it would actually become a negative bar on this graph. It would flip from blue to green. And you can see the effect on the final alcohol to jet sustainable aviation fuel carbon intensity score. It goes from the original 71 all the way down to 7. So it's a material impact, and we're more supportive of fuels that look to the specific facts and circumstances of the actual production. So life cycle analysis or GREET model based carbon intensity scoring to drive incentives. The second category I have there is unbiased clean fuel policy. And, this is really tied to the 45Z experience. And I mentioned that one of the changes the One Big Beautiful Bill Act put on 45Z was beginning this year. You can't have a negative emission rate. So you can't use negative carbon intensity fuels, at least as far as using them in the calculation to determine the credit value. And what's the reason I say it's somewhat biased is the next sentence of the rule said, except for RNG made from animal waste management systems. And so great news for the RNG community, and I'm glad they got that exemption. I don't think the cap should have ever been put in place in the first place. It was never the intent of 45Z, which was always supposed to be technology agnostic, but it got in there, and we have to live with it. So, looking forward at either policy changes to 45Z or, as these state and regional programs, LCFS style, become reality, we're looking for no uneven caps or incentives that reward one technology over another. Third on my list is, unlike ethanol, say, for example, which you can put the finished product in a rail car or on a truck and transport it around. Gaseous fuels like methane can't easily or cheaply be shipped by trucks or rail. So we do rely on the U.S. natural gas system for delivery to our customers.